Walter Bramble and the Lantern-Lit Meadow, a sleep story. Chapter 1. The Long Way Round. There are perhaps 8 evenings in the year when the light in England does not so much fade as decline to leave, and the last week of June holds most of them. Walter Bramble had spent one of these evenings at a talk in the village hall at Ashcott, 4 miles from home, on the subject of parish boundary stones. It had been given by a man who owned 200 photographs of parish boundary stones and had not been asked about them for some years, and it had run 40 minutes over. Walter had enjoyed it more than he expected. He had also missed the last bus. He did not mind particularly. He stood outside the hall while the chairs were stacked behind him and looked at the sky, which at 20 to 10 was still a pale green in the west, and he did the arithmetic. 4 miles by the road, which was narrow and had no path, and a bend near the bell that had frightened him before, or 3 miles over the down on the footpath in the dark. He had a small lantern in his rucksack. It was the sort that folds flat and then pulls open on a concertina of plastic, and it had been given to him by his niece 2 Christmases ago with an expression that suggested she had run out of ideas. It was extremely bright. It was so bright that he had never once used it, on the grounds that turning it on in an ordinary room felt like being arrested. He set off over the down. The path went up out of the village between 2 hedges and then out through a gate onto open grass. And the moment he was through the gate he stopped, because the whole sky opened over him at once, and he had forgotten how much of it there was. The last of the sun had gone, but the west had not accepted it. There was a long, low band of light along the horizon. Apricot going to green, going to a blue so dark it had begun to think about being black. And out of that blue the first stars had come, 2 or 3 only, the confident ones. Below and behind him the village had 4 lights on. He counted them, because there were few enough to count, which is a rare and rather wonderful state for a village to be in at 10 at night. A bedroom window at the far end, the lamp over the door of the bell, something orange in a greenhouse, and the little blue glow of the telephone exchange building that had not had anybody inside it since about 1990. Walter went on up the hill without the lantern because his eyes were managing, and because a man of 68 who has just walked up a slope is entitled to a moment of not being able to see very much. At the top, the path ran along the shoulder of the down with a wire fence on the left, and beyond the fence a great sloping meadow that fell away south into a hollow. Chalk grassland. He knew it in daylight. In daylight it was knapweed and marjoram and small yellow things whose names he had learned twice and lost twice, and skylarks going up out of it, and on a hot afternoon it smelled like a herb drawer. At night it was a grey slope with a darker line of trees at the bottom, and somewhere down in the middle of it there was a light, and it was going out. Chapter 2. The Woman with the Bad Lamp. Walter stopped and watched. The light was small and low and yellow. It moved a short way to the left, wavered, shrank to a point, and disappeared. There was a silence of perhaps 30 seconds. Then it came back and steadied and moved a short way to the right and went out again. He stood at the fence with his hands on the top wire and watched this happen 4 times, and it was on the 4th that he heard, quite clearly across 200 yards of still air, a woman saying a word that Walter had spent 31 years discouraging in classrooms. He put his head back and laughed before he could stop himself. The light came back on and stopped moving and turned towards him. "Who is that?" "My name is Walter Bramble," he called. "I am on the footpath. I am sorry. I was not laughing at you." "You were." "I was. I apologize." A pause. "Well," she said, "you may as well come down, if you are coming. Mind the fence. There is a stile 10 yards to your left, and the top step is rotten." The stile was 10 yards to his left, and the top step was rotten. Walter came over it carefully and went down the slope towards the light, through grass that was up to his knees and wet at the top with the dew that comes down in the last hour. And by the time he reached her, the bottoms of his trousers were soaked through, and he found that he did not care about this either. She was perhaps 65. She was small and weathered, and wore a waxed jacket that had gone the colour of a wet stone. And she had a crook, an actual crook, which Walter had not expected, and which he tried not to look at too obviously. In her other hand she held a hurricane lamp. It was brass, or it had been brass once, and now it was mostly the colour of an old penny. It had a glass chimney with a crack running up one side, mended with a strip of foil tape. Inside it, a wick was burning about 1/4 of an inch of flame, which was doing very little for anybody. "Ada Crowther," she said. "Walter Bramble." "You said." "I did. I am aware I have said it twice now, and I'm not going to be able to explain why." Ada Crowther looked at him for a moment, and something around her eyes moved slightly, which he understood to be as much as he was going to get. "You are the boundary stones," she said. "I beg your pardon?" "There was a talk in the hall. It was on the notice board for a fortnight. That will be where you have come from, because there is nowhere else you could have come from at 20 to 10 on a Thursday." "There was a talk," Walter agreed. "It was good." "It would be." She turned back to the meadow and held the lamp up, and the flame ducked and shrank and went out. Nobody said anything for a second or two. "That," said Ada Crowther, "is the 11th time." Chapter 3. The offer. It was a wick problem, or a fuel problem, or a crack problem, and she talked Walter through all three while she got it going again with a lighter and a great deal of patience. "The wick has gone hard at the top. I trimmed it Tuesday, and I trimmed it wrong, and there is a draught coming in where that glass has gone, and if I hold it on the wrong side it puts itself out, and I have been holding it on the wrong side because the right side puts it into my eyes." "Have you a spare?" "I have a spare in the trailer, which is at the top of 9 Acre, which is over there." And she pointed with the crook at a distance in a direction that meant nothing at all to Walter. "And it is 20 minutes each way, and I have not got 20 minutes each way." "Why not?" "Because I have 2 ewes out." She said it flatly, the way people say the thing that has been sitting on them for an hour. "They came through the corner where the badgers have been at the netting. There is a lamb with one of them. They will be down in the hollow, because that is where they always go, and if I do not get them in tonight, then tomorrow morning they are on the road, and the road at 6 in the morning is not a thing I want to think about." Walter looked out at the meadow, which was large and dark and entirely featureless. Then he took off his rucksack. "I have a lantern," he said. "Have you?" "I have. It is a very good one. It is electric, and I'm assured it is waterproof, and I'm fairly sure I've never turned it on." Ada said nothing, which he took as an invitation, so he found it and pulled the concertina open and pressed the button on the top. The meadow went white. It was, in fairness, an excellent lantern. It threw a hard, flat brilliance about 15 yards in every direction, and in that 15 yards, Walter could suddenly see everything. The individual heads of the knapweed, the flattened track where something had come through, the seams of Ada Crowther's jacket, a moth going up past his face like a scrap of paper in a draught. Beyond the 15 yards, there was nothing at all. The dark had become a wall. "Well," said Walter. "There," said Ada. They went down the slope with it for about 6 minutes. Walter carried the lantern because he had the free hand, and he held it high the way you are supposed to. And the two of them walked in a bright bubble of grass and each other and saw absolutely no sheep whatsoever. Ada stopped. "Turn it off," she said. "We have not looked at the hollow." "Turn it off, Mr. Bramble." He turned it off. Chapter 4. 10 minutes. The dark came down like a lid. It was total for a moment. Walter could not see the ground. He could not see Ada, who was standing near enough that he could hear her jacket. He put his hand out slightly, which is what everybody does, and found nothing, and felt foolish and put it back. "Now we wait," said Ada. "For what?" "For your eyes. 10 minutes. Sit down. The grass is wet, but you are already wet, and you cannot make it worse." Walter sat down in the wet grass on a chalk hillside in the dark, next to a woman he had met 11 minutes ago, and thought that if anybody had described this evening to him at breakfast, he would have doubted several parts of it. 10 minutes is a long time," he said. "It is 7 minutes for most of it, and about half an hour for the last bit. Your eyes do the easy part quickly. The part that matters takes as long as it takes, and you cannot hurry it, and every time you look at a lit thing, you go back to the beginning." A pause. "Which is why I do not carry a lantern like yours." "But you carry a lantern. I carry a bad one." He heard her shift. "That is not an accident. A 1/4 inch of flame in a smoked glass will let me see my own feet and the gate catch and a ewe at 8 yards, and it will not take my eyes away from me. What you have got in that bag is a wonderful thing for finding a fuse box. Out here it makes you blind in every direction but one, and then it makes you confident about it, which is worse." Walter sat with that. He had been told at some point in the 1970s that the eye takes 20 minutes to fully adapt to darkness, and he had filed the fact away and never once tested it in the way of a man who reads a great deal and goes outside less than he means to. It had seemed like a piece of information. It had not occurred to him that it was an instruction. 20 minutes. Standing still, doing nothing. There was almost no circumstance in ordinary modern life in which a person would ever discover this, because there was almost no circumstance in which a person would put a light out and then decline to put another one on. The dark was not total any more. It had begun, very slowly, to have parts. There was a horizon. There was a lump to the left that was a thorn bush. The sky, which he had thought was empty, was not remotely empty, and while he watched, more of it kept arriving, star after star coming up out of the black, as though somebody in another room were slowly turning something. And the sounds arrived, which was the part he had not anticipated at all. They had been there the whole time. He was fairly certain of that. But with the lantern on, they had been somewhere behind the light, and now that the light was off, they came forward and stood around him. There was the grass itself, which moved without any wind that he could feel, a dry, small rustle at the level of his ears. There was a sheep, coughing, a long way off on the other side of the hill. There was a plane, very high, going somewhere that had nothing to do with any of this. And under all of it, so constant that he had to concentrate to hear it as a thing separate from the silence, there was the sound of the grass drying out its dew onto itself, which is not really a sound at all, and which Walter would not have been able to describe to anybody, and which he was quite sure he could hear. "How long have you had the field?" he asked. "It is not my field. It is the trust's field. I have the sheep, and the trust has the field, and the arrangement is that the sheep eat it in a particular way at a particular time of year, so that it stays what it is instead of turning into scrub. 411 species of plant on this hill." Somebody counted. She sniffed. "It is a good hill." "What is it called?" "Candlemead." Walter turned his head towards her, although there was still not much point in doing so. "That is a very good name. It is on the tithe map as Candlemead, and it is on a will from 1590 as Candlemead, and there is no church connection, and there was never a chandler, and nobody could tell you where it came from." She got up. Her voice moved higher and to the right. "There you are. 8 minutes. Stand up and look at your feet." Walter stood up and looked at his feet. There was a green light in the grass. Chapter 5. The Sleeping Stars. It was about the size of a grain of rice. It was 3 feet away, low down, close to the ground, sitting on a grass stem, and it was not yellow like a flame, and not white like his lantern. It was a green that Walter had no name for. If he had been made to choose, he would have said the green of the sky in the last minute of a summer sunset, or the green on the inside of a wave, but neither of those was right, and afterwards he stopped trying. It did not flicker. That was the thing. It was completely, impossibly steady, as though somebody had put a fragment of something down in the grass and left it there. "Do not touch it," said Ada. "I would not dream of it." "You would. Everybody does. It goes out for 20 minutes if you breathe on it wrong, and she has only got a fortnight." She. Female glowworm. She is not a worm, and she does not glow for us. She has climbed up that stem tonight, and she will climb up it every night for a fortnight, and she is a beetle, and she cannot fly, and she cannot eat, and everything she has left she is spending on that light so that a male can find her, which he does from about 40 feet, if there is nothing brighter about. Walter said very quietly, "And I stood here with a lantern." "You did." "For 6 minutes." "You did." And then, in a slightly different voice, "I have done it for longer than that with a head torch, and I knew better, and there is not a person alive who has not done it once." She touched his arm and turned him. "Now," she said, "look up the slope." Walter looked up the slope. The meadow was full of them. He could not at first take it as one thing. His eye kept finding them singly, 1 here, 2 together, a scatter of 4, and each time he found one, 3 more came up in the edge of his vision, and when he turned to those, the first ones seemed to grow brighter. It went on and on up the hill. There were dozens. There were more than dozens. They lay across the slope in no pattern he could see, thickest in the middle where the grass was longest, thinning out towards the fence line, going right up over the shoulder of the down and out of sight, green and steady and absolutely silent. He tried briefly to count them in the way that a certain sort of mind will always try to count a thing, and gave it up at about 70 because the ones at the edges kept changing their minds about whether they existed. Then he tried to work out how far up the hill they went, and could not do that either, because past a certain distance the individual lights stopped being lights and became a faint green graininess in the dark, the way a crowd stops being people. He gave up on measuring it, and simply looked at it, which took some doing, because Walter Bramble had spent his whole working life turning things into sentences, and there were no sentences here that were any use at all. Above them, the sky had come up in full by now, and the Milky Way had come up with it, a long, soft smear of it running from the trees at the bottom of the hollow to somewhere over the church at Ashcot, so that there was a field of small green lights lying in the grass, and above it a field of small white ones. And the horizon between them had gone so dark that for a moment Walter genuinely could not tell where the meadow ended. "Ah," he said. "Yes. Candlemead." Candlemead. They stood in it. "My grandmother called them the sleeping stars," said Ada Crowther after a while. "She was a great one for making things up and telling you they were old. But I have never been able to shake it off, and I have tried, because it is a soft sort of a thing to say, and I am not a soft sort of a person. They are down, and they are still, and they do not twinkle. So," a shrug in her voice, "sleeping stars." Walter did not answer. He was 68 years old, and had lived within 9 miles of this hill for the whole of it, and had walked over it perhaps 200 times, always in the day, always on the way to somewhere. He found that he had put his hand over the button on the top of the lantern so that he could not press it by accident. Chapter 6. The 2 ewes. "Right," said Ada, eventually. "Sheep." "How?" "Same way. Look for where there are none." Walter did not understand this for about 4 seconds, and then he did, and the understanding was so pleasant that he stood there enjoying it instead of doing anything about it. They walked the meadow slowly, side by side, 10 yards apart, and they did not look for sheep at all. They looked at the pattern of green lights on the ground, and they walked towards the places where the pattern stopped. The first stop was a gorse bush. The second was a patch of shorter turf where a rabbit had been at it, and there was nothing there but the shortness. The third was in the hollow, near the bottom, where the ground levelled out and the grass grew rank, and there ought to have been a great many of them, and instead there was a long, dark shape about 6 feet across with nothing in it at all. Ada made a sound, low in her throat, and the dark shape got up. It got up in 3 parts, 2 large parts and 1 small. "There you are, you great daft article," said Ada Crowther with enormous feeling to a sheep. The ewes did not run. They stood there in the way of animals who have been located and have decided to take it well. And the lamb, which was a big lamb now and nearly the size of its mother, pressed itself against her flank and looked at Walter with an expression of frank horror. "Do we drive them?" "We walk. They know the way. They came out of that corner, and they will go back through that corner if you do not do anything clever." So they walked, at the pace of 2 elderly ewes on a June night, back up the slope of Candlemead, and it took 25 minutes, and Walter would have been glad if it had taken 2 hours. It was, he thought later, the slowest he had walked since he was a child. You cannot hurry a sheep uphill. You can make a sheep run, which is a different thing and achieves nothing, or you can walk behind it at the speed it has chosen and let it stop when it wants to stop, which it does often for no reason that is ever explained. The two ewes stopped 4 times, once to eat, once to look at the trees at the bottom of the hollow with an air of deep suspicion, twice for nothing whatsoever. And each time they stopped, Walter and Ada stopped and stood in the wet grass in the dark and waited. He noticed on the second stop that he had begun to walk differently. He was placing his feet rather than putting them down. He was watching the ground ahead for the small green lights and going round them, and Ada was doing the same on her side without any discussion having taken place about it, so that the two of them were making a slow and slightly ridiculous zigzag up a hillside in order not to inconvenience an insect that would not have noticed either way. He decided he did not mind being ridiculous. On the third stop, Ada said, "The counts have gone down." "By much?" "Depends who you ask and how they counted, but down. They are down everywhere, and here they are down less than most, and the reason they are down less than most is that there is nothing on this hill and no road up it, and the nearest street lamp is 1.5 miles away in the wrong direction." She shifted the crook. "That is the whole of it. There is no clever conservation to it. You just have to leave the light off." The ewes decided to continue. Ada lit the hurricane lamp again at the gate, on the third attempt, and by its 1/4 inch of flame she found the corner where the netting had gone and pinned it back together with 3 lengths of orange baler twine from her pocket, working almost entirely by feel. "That will hold until Sunday. Then I do it properly." She straightened up and pressed her hand into the small of her back. "It always holds until Sunday." The sheep went in and put their heads down and did not look back in the way of sheep, and that was the whole of the drama. Chapter 7. The lone at the stile with the rotten top step. They stopped. "You will be all right from here?" "It is downhill, and then it is a lane," said Walter. "I have been walking home in the dark since 1964. He got the lantern out of his rucksack and held it out to her. "Take this." "I do not want it." "You do want it." "Not for out here. You said yourself, there is a lambing shed, and there is a trailer at the top of 9 Acre in February at 5 in the morning, and there is a night when something is wrong with an animal and you want to see it properly, and nothing else will do." Ada looked at the folded thing in his hand. "It is a good one," she said grudgingly. "It is a very good one. My niece has excellent taste and no idea what to do with me." She took it. "I will use it in the shed," she said. "I will not bring it up here. I would think less of you if you did." That got him something that was very nearly a smile. "Come back in a fortnight," said Ada Crowther, "and there will be none, not one. They are up now, and by the 2nd week of July they are done, and then it is 11 months of an ordinary field with sheep in it, and everybody who saw it thinks it must be like that all the time." She hitched the crook up under her arm. "It is not like that all the time. That is rather the point of it." She went off up the slope with the bad lamp swinging and its 1/4 inch of flame, and Walter watched her until it went out, and then went on watching, and after about 40 seconds it came back on, and he heard faintly the word again. He went over the stile. The lane down into Willowmere was hedged on both sides and darker than the open hill, and for the first half-mile he could see almost nothing and did not mind it. His eyes were as good as they were going to get. His feet knew the camber. Somewhere over the hedge, a fox went about its business without hurrying. He thought about a field with two names, one on a map and one from a grandmother who made things up. He thought about 411 species of plant, and one beetle who cannot eat, spending a fortnight of everything she has on a light the size of a grain of rice. He thought, without much sadness, about the 200 times he had crossed that hill in daylight on his way to somewhere else. By the time Walter Bramble reached his own gate, it was 1/4 midnight, and the last of the green was gone out of the west. He hung his coat where it could drip. He put his wet trousers over the bath. He drank a glass of water, standing at the sink in the dark, because putting the kitchen light on seemed that night a slightly vandalous thing to do. Then he went up. He lay in the dark with the window open and the curtain not drawn, and above the roofline he could see 3 stars, which was all his window ever offered him. And he thought about the other ones, the low ones, lying out in the wet grass on the shoulder of the down, 4 miles away, burning quietly at nobody in particular. They would still be there at 2, they would still be there at 3, and Walter Bramble, who had not intended any of it, who had gone out to hear about boundary stones and had come home by way of a lantern-lit meadow, went to sleep somewhere in the middle of thinking about it and slept until nearly 9.